When I saw my husband flipping through my phone, my heart skipped a beat, not from the fear of being caught, but because he would see those messages. The ones I had forgotten to delete. I tried to snatch the phone from his hands, but he swiftly pulled it back, continuing to read. I watched his face as it changed, reading each line, and I felt my life shatter in those few seconds. Yes, he would find out the truth. But not all of it. His hands trembled as he turned the page, and I knew right then, he would reach the message that would destroy everything. The one that would explain everything and put a decisive end to it. Or maybe, it would only confuse him more. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in his hands, and a new notification popped up on the screen. I saw his face pale when he read the sender's name. He froze. Not even a blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, a habit when I'm nervous. My nerves mixed with the growing horror of realizing what I had done. His breath quickened. I could hear it, even from 2 meters away. This was exactly what I had feared the most. Because 3 months ago, I made that mistake, the one that changed everything, and now. I didn't know what to do, but let me tell you how it all really started. Before I share the secret I've been trying to hide all this time, tell me in the comments where you're watching this from and answer this question. Have you ever had a secret that you tried to hide with all your might, but eventually, you couldn't keep it anymore? I remember the day my husband first brought it up like it was yesterday. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. He had that look in his eyes, the one I've come to recognize as his "let's try something new" expression. His words hung in the air between us, almost tangible, as I stared at him, unsure of what he meant. I was thinking, maybe it would be good for us to try something. A little experiment, he said, his voice steady but with an edge of anticipation that I couldn't ignore. I set my coffee cup down slowly, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. I could sense the shift in the air. It wasn't just the usual "let's redecorate the living room" kind of idea. No, this was something different. Something dangerous. But there was also a part of me, one that I didn't want to acknowledge, that felt a flicker of curiosity. Maybe it was the monotony of our marriage. Maybe it was the years of silence that had crept in, slowly, until we were both too used to the emptiness to even notice. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that whatever he was suggesting would rekindle something between us. Something that had long been lost. What do you mean by experiment? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. I could feel my pulse quicken. I knew, deep down, that I wasn't ready for this. Not yet. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine, as if weighing my response, deciding whether or not to proceed. What if we invited someone else into our lives? Someone creative, maybe? An artist. You could model for him. Let him paint you. I blinked, the words not immediately sinking in. Model? I repeated, my voice tight, as if the air around me had thickened. He nodded, his face serious. It would be a way to break free from the routine, the usual. A way to keep things fresh. And it could be good for us. For our marriage. I didn't know what to say. Fresh? Our marriage was far from fresh. It was stale, suffocating, like an old coat I had worn for too long and couldn't bring myself to part with. But at the same time, I couldn't deny the flicker of intrigue. He had a point, I suppose. There was a certain allure in the idea of doing something different, something that might push us out of the routine. But at the back of my mind, a voice whispered that this was a dangerous path. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from speaking. Okay, I said, almost too quickly, the words slipping out before I could process them fully. We can try it. But, only if you think it'll help. My husband's face softened, a slight smile playing at the corners of his lips. I think it will. It'll be good for both of us. I nodded, trying to hide the sense of dread rising in my chest. Okay. Let's do it. As the days passed, the idea became more real. The artist he spoke of was someone he'd met through his work, a painter, a man in his 30s with an intense passion for his craft. He had a way of seeing the world differently, or so my husband said. But I didn't know much about him. I didn't even know if I wanted to. And yet, the thought of modeling for him, of becoming something more than just a wife, stirred something inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. The first meeting was set in motion. My husband arranged everything, and I didn't think much of it until the day arrived. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it as I stood before the mirror, adjusting the dress I'd chosen, a simple, elegant piece, just tight enough to show off my figure without being too revealing. It was strange, the way I was preparing. I wasn't doing this for myself. I was doing it for him, for my husband, who believed that this experiment could somehow save us. When I arrived at the studio, I was immediately struck by the atmosphere. The room was dimly lit, with large canvases leaning against the walls. The artist, a man with dark eyes and a calm demeanor, welcomed me warmly, but I could see the curiosity in his gaze as he assessed me. It was unnerving. I could feel his eyes tracing every inch of me, and yet I couldn't bring myself to push him away. There was something magnetic about his presence, something I couldn't quite place. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft but commanding, as if he expected me to answer truthfully. I swallowed, nodding. Yes. And so it began. The session lasted for hours. I sat in various positions, trying to look natural, trying to pretend that this wasn't as strange as it felt. My husband watched from the corner of the room, his presence barely noticed as I became lost in the task. I could feel the tension building in my chest, and yet, I also felt a certain liberation. This was new. This was different. At the end of the session, I felt exposed, vulnerable. But when I looked at the canvas, I was surprised by what I saw. The artist had captured something in me that I hadn't realized was there, a vulnerability, a yearning. It made me uncomfortable. It made me feel as though I had been laid bare in a way I hadn't anticipated. I glanced at my husband, expecting some sort of reaction, but he was silent, his gaze fixed on the painting. I didn't know what to say. But as the days passed, I found myself returning to that image, to that feeling of being seen in a way I hadn't been in years. It was unsettling, and yet I couldn't shake it. And that's when I realized, the experiment wasn't about saving our marriage. It was about something else entirely. I didn't know it yet, but my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine. The days after the first session with the artist were strange. It wasn't so much the act of being painted that had affected me, it was what the experience had unearthed within me. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. My husband, ever the optimist, believed the whole idea had worked. He was excited, almost exhilarated. He told me how he saw potential in this, how it could reignite something between us. But all I could think about was the artist's eyes on me, the way he saw something I hadn't realized was there. I wondered if that was what had been missing in our marriage for so long, the feeling of being truly seen. I kept telling myself it was just a one-time thing. An experiment. A creative endeavor. Nothing more. But the thoughts kept returning. I couldn't stop thinking about the way the artist looked at me, about the depth in his gaze. It wasn't about desire, not exactly. It was something else, something deeper, an understanding, a connection. And though I tried to dismiss it, that feeling lingered. It haunted me, like a whisper I couldn't shake off. A week later, my husband mentioned the idea of another session. This time, he seemed even more eager about it. "I think you should do it again," he said one evening as we sat at the dinner table. "It's been good for you, hasn't it? I can see how it's opened you up." I'm sure it will only get better from here. I didn't say anything at first. I simply stared at him, wondering if he truly believed that. Did he think this was the solution? Did he think that seeing me with another man would somehow fix everything? His voice broke into my thoughts. Maybe it's time for you to take the next step with him. You've done the modeling part, now maybe you could collaborate in a deeper way. He could get to know you more. It could be enlightening. The words hung in the air like a cloud. I knew what he meant. He wanted me to allow the artist more into my personal world. And though part of me felt overwhelmed by the prospect, another part was intrigued, even tempted. It wasn't that I wanted to be with the artist, not in the way you might think. It was more about the allure of doing something different, something that shook up the patterns of my life. A life that had become far too predictable, too controlled. My marriage, despite all its good intentions, had become a prison of routine, and this experiment, was my way of rebelling. Still, there was a part of me that hesitated. A quiet voice in the back of my mind warned me that this would lead to something I wasn't ready to face. I didn't want to confront the idea that perhaps, after all these years, I was still searching for something that wasn't there anymore. But then, as always, my husband's enthusiasm overpowered my doubts. He was convinced this would work. He wanted to believe in it, and perhaps, so did I. So, despite my inner conflict, I agreed. I agreed to see the artist again, to meet him under the guise of art, under the assumption that this would somehow make everything better. That afternoon, I stood before the mirror again. This time, I chose a simple white dress, one that was comfortable but also flattering. I needed to feel at ease, but also present myself in a way that made me feel desirable. But even as I examined my reflection, a part of me couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my chest. This wasn't just about the painting anymore. It was something much more complicated. Something I couldn't put into words. When I arrived at the artist's studio, I was surprised by how familiar it felt now. The scent of oil paint still hung in the air, mingling with the faint smell of wood and linseed. The canvas was set up in the same spot as last time, and the artist greeted me with a calm smile, his eyes assessing me in that same way. But this time, there was something different, something deeper in his gaze. "We're going to try something different today," he said, his voice soft yet direct. "I want to paint you, but not just your outward appearance. I want to capture something inside you. Something that's been hidden for a long time." I nodded, my heart racing. I wasn't entirely sure what he meant, but something in his tone told me this wouldn't be like the last time. This would be more intense. More intimate. He asked me to sit on a plush chair in the center of the room, the same one I had sat in before. This time, though, I could sense the shift. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the very air around us was thicker. The artist worked in silence, his focus entirely on me as he moved around, preparing his brushes. I could feel the weight of his presence, like a constant pull, like gravity itself was urging me to move closer to him. And then it happened. He came around to my side, his arm brushing against mine as he adjusted the lighting. It was a simple touch, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through me. I could feel his proximity, his warmth, the subtle pressure of his presence. And in that moment, something inside me stirred. "You're beautiful," he said softly, as if to himself, but I heard it. I felt it. His words lingered in the space between us, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. I forgot about my husband. I forgot about the experiment. His touch, though fleeting, remained. I could feel it in the air, in the space that stretched between us. It was a quiet intimacy, one that didn't require words. I could see the focus in his eyes, his gaze never leaving me as he painted. His attention to detail, the way he observed every inch of my skin, the curve of my body, it felt like he was seeing me in a way I hadn't been seen in years. The room seemed to close in around me, and though I had agreed to this, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the emotions it stirred. I had allowed myself to be vulnerable in front of him, in a way I had never allowed myself to be vulnerable with my husband. And as I sat there, exposed in ways I had never imagined, I began to realize something. This was no longer just about art. This was about something deeper, something I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. But I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what I might discover about myself. Afraid of what it meant to be seen in a way I hadn't allowed anyone to see me in years. And more than anything, I was afraid of what this would mean for my marriage. But still, I stayed. As the session came to a close, the artist stepped back to admire his work. I didn't know what I expected to see. Perhaps I thought he would have captured something of my soul, something raw and exposed. But when I looked at the canvas, all I saw was a woman I didn't fully recognize. The portrait wasn't of the woman my husband saw. It wasn't the woman I had tried to be for him. It was me, unfiltered, unguarded, and yet, strangely, a version of me I didn't know I had been hiding. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at it. It was both liberating and terrifying at the same time. The artist's eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in them, something I couldn't quite place. But whatever it was, it made me feel like I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And as I left the studio that day, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. My marriage, my life, it all felt different now, as if I had unlocked a door that I could never close again. The days following the second session with the artist were like a haze, a blur of confusion and mounting tension. My mind was spinning, constantly drifting back to that moment, the way the artist's gaze had felt on me, the way he had seen something in me that I didn't even recognize. But the more I thought about it, the more it unsettled me. I didn't know if it was the physical closeness, the strange sense of being seen fully for the first time, or the growing connection between us. All I knew was that something inside me had changed, and I couldn't go back to the way things were. My husband, on the other hand, seemed more confident than ever that this experiment was working. He was excited, and that excitement bled into every conversation, every touch, every gesture. He was trying so hard to convince me that this was the right thing for us, that it would bring us closer, but the truth was, I wasn't sure what I was feeling anymore. I had started the experiment thinking it might help, but now, I wasn't so sure. It was as if the more I participated in it, the more distant I felt from my own desires, my own identity. At night, when my husband was asleep beside me, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the decisions I was making. I wondered if he had any idea of how much this experiment was changing me. I wondered if he even cared, or if he was simply going along with it because he wanted me to be happy. But even as I wrestled with these questions, the pull of the artist was undeniable. It wasn't just his talent or the way he painted me, it was his presence, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I found myself looking forward to our next meeting, to the next time I would be in his presence. And that frightened me. One afternoon, just a few days after our second session, I found myself standing in front of the mirror once again, this time in a different dress, one that was a bit more revealing, one that I wouldn't normally wear. I didn't even know why I had chosen it. I didn't know what I was trying to prove. I simply felt the need to escape from the role I had been playing. I wanted something different, something more. But was I willing to sacrifice everything for it? I had arranged to meet the artist again. This time, there would be no paintings. No art. Just the two of us. I wasn't sure what would happen, but I couldn't stop the curiosity, the pull, the desire to see where this would go. The tension between us had been growing, and I knew that something was going to break. When I arrived at the studio, the air felt thicker than before. The walls seemed to close in on me as I stepped inside. The artist was there, as usual, setting up for the session. But this time, there was no canvas. No brushes. Just him. "I thought we might do something different today," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "No paintings. Just conversation. I'd like to understand you better. I'd like to know what's really going on inside." I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. His words sent a ripple through me, like a stone dropped into still water. He wasn't asking about art anymore. He was asking about me. And in that moment, I realized that this was what I had been searching for. Not the painting. Not the experiment. But someone who wanted to understand me, someone who could see beyond the surface. We sat down across from each other, the room feeling impossibly quiet, as though the world outside had stopped spinning. The artist didn't rush me to speak. He simply waited, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if all the walls I had carefully built over the years were crumbling in that one moment. "I don't know what I'm doing," I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "That's okay. Most of us don't." There was something comforting about his words, about the way he didn't judge me, didn't push me. He simply allowed me to be. I felt a deep sense of relief, as though I could finally breathe again. But at the same time, I knew that this conversation, this connection, was changing everything. "I feel like I'm losing myself," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "Like I'm not the person I used to be. Like I don't know who I am anymore." His gaze softened, and for a moment, I could see the concern in his eyes. "You're not alone in feeling that way," he said quietly. "Sometimes, we get so caught up in what we think we should be that we forget who we are." I nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. It was true. I had been so focused on being the perfect wife, the perfect woman, that I had lost touch with myself. With my desires. With what I needed. And in that moment, I realized that I had been trying to fill a void in my life with the wrong things. The wrong people. I had been searching for something outside of myself when the answer had been inside me all along. The artist didn't speak for a while, but his presence was enough. I didn't need words to know that he understood. That he saw me. Truly saw me. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "But I don't know how to fix this." He reached out and gently placed his hand on mine, the touch warm and steady. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an offer. It was just a connection, an understanding. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. "I think," he said softly, "sometimes the only way to heal is to let go of the things that hold us back." I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the words resonated with me. Perhaps it was time to let go of the life I had been clinging to, the life that had become a cage. Perhaps it was time to step into the unknown, to embrace the parts of me I had buried for so long. As I left the studio that day, the weight in my chest had lessened, but the uncertainty remained. I wasn't sure where this path would lead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the verge of something important. Something that could change everything. But what would be the cost? And was I ready to face it? I didn't know the answer yet. But I was beginning to understand that the only way forward was to stop pretending. To stop holding on to the past. To let go. The days blurred into each other after that afternoon in the studio. I spent most of my time in a haze, trying to focus on the mundane tasks of daily life, cooking dinner, cleaning, running errands, but none of it felt real anymore. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger staring back at me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something inside me had shifted. I felt disconnected from myself, like I was standing on the edge of something, but I didn't know what lay on the other side. I kept going through the motions of my marriage, playing the role of the dutiful wife, but inside, I was crumbling. My husband seemed to be thriving in this new experiment, convinced that it was a step toward revitalizing our relationship. He talked about it all the time, how wonderful it was that we were exploring something new together, how much closer it was making us. But the more he talked, the more I distanced myself from him. I couldn't help but wonder if he really understood what was happening to me. Did he realize that I wasn't the same person anymore? Or had he, too, become numb to the changes in our relationship? He seemed so sure that everything would work out, but I knew deep down that something was wrong. It wasn't just the artist that had affected me, it was the entire experience, the idea that we could somehow transform ourselves by stepping into someone else's world. But in doing so, I had lost a part of myself. And it was terrifying. The tension between me and my husband was palpable, even though we hadn't openly acknowledged it. We were both pretending to be fine, but the cracks were starting to show. There were moments when I would catch him looking at me with a questioning gaze, as if he was searching for something in my eyes that wasn't there. And I, in turn, would watch him, trying to decipher his thoughts, but it felt like there was a wall between us. A wall that I wasn't sure how to tear down. Then came the phone call. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea and staring at the pile of paperwork in front of me when my phone rang. The name on the screen made my heart skip a beat. It was him, the artist. I hadn't expected to hear from him again so soon. My first instinct was to ignore the call, to pretend that nothing had changed, but then I remembered the way I had felt in his presence. The way he made me feel seen, in a way no one else had in years. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, and then his voice, smooth and steady, filled the silence. It's me. I've been thinking about our last session, and I wanted to ask if you'd be open to doing something a little different. Something more personal. I felt my stomach tighten. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I wasn't sure what he meant by personal, but I couldn't ignore the flutter of anticipation that stirred in me. It was as if he had the power to pull me in, to make me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in so long. I don't know, I said, my voice shaky. What do you mean? I'd like to explore you more, outside of the art. I'd like to talk with you. To really understand who you are. What makes you tick? What you're hiding. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't just about the painting anymore. It wasn't even about the experiment. It was about something deeper, something more intimate. I could feel my heart racing as I struggled to gather my thoughts. I'm not sure if I can do that, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm married. I have responsibilities. I know, he replied, his tone gentle but insistent. But that doesn't change the fact that there's something between us, something that's hard to ignore. I think you feel it too. You're not the same as you were before we met. And neither am I. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was true. I had changed. I had become someone else, someone I didn't recognize. I had opened myself up to him in ways I never thought possible. And now, I was being asked to cross a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. But as I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand, I knew that the choice wasn't entirely mine to make anymore. I had already let the door open, and I wasn't sure if I could close it. I had already let myself be seen, truly seen, and that was something I couldn't undo. I'll think about it, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I had time to process them. I need some time. There was a brief silence on the other end, and then he spoke again. Take your time. I'll be here when you're ready. I ended the call, but the weight of it lingered. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was racing. What was I doing? What was I becoming? The lines between right and wrong, between love and desire, had started to blur, and I didn't know how to find my way back. As I sat down at the table, I tried to steady my breathing. The phone call had shaken me, but it had also revealed something I had been avoiding. I wasn't just seeking validation anymore. I was seeking something deeper, something that had been missing from my life for far too long. I was searching for meaning, for connection, for something that would fill the void I had been trying to ignore. But what did that mean for my marriage? For my husband? Could I really walk away from everything I had built with him, everything we had shared? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more pressing than the last. I didn't know where this path would lead, but I knew one thing for sure: I was standing at the edge of something that could change everything. And I didn't know if I was ready to jump. But what choice did I have? I had already taken the first step. Now, there was no turning back. It's strange how life seems to offer us moments of clarity when we least expect them. When I thought I had made my decision, when I thought I understood where this path was leading, something shifted. And the more I tried to control the direction, the more I realized how little I actually controlled. I was standing on the edge, my feet planted firmly in two worlds, neither of which seemed to offer the certainty I desperately wanted. The phone call had left me unsettled, but more than that, it had left me questioning everything. The artist's words echoed in my mind, like a song I couldn't get out of my head. You're not the same as you were before we met. Neither am I. That was the truth of it, wasn't it? The me before the artist, before the painting, before this entire experiment with my husband, it felt like another lifetime. A version of me that was neatly tied into a box, perfectly presented to the world. But with every session in that studio, with every conversation with the artist, that box started to crack open. The person I had been for so long, the wife who tried so hard to fit into the mold that had been created for her, was slipping away. And in her place was someone who was beginning to question what she truly wanted. I tried to ignore it. I tried to drown out the voice inside me that told me this was only the beginning of a journey I wasn't ready to take. But each time I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She was different. She had seen things, felt things that she couldn't unsee, unfeel. I had never been in a position like this before, standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path would lead to something meaningful, something real. My husband didn't understand. He continued to be optimistic, convinced that the experiment was exactly what we needed. He talked about the next steps, how we should invite the artist again, how we should continue the process of exploring our boundaries. He didn't see the way I was pulling away. He didn't feel the distance growing between us. And yet, there I was, standing on the edge of our marriage, knowing that I could either walk back to safety or jump into the unknown. That evening, after dinner, I sat on the couch next to my husband, trying to pretend everything was normal. He was talking about our next steps, about making arrangements with the artist for another session, but I couldn't focus on his words. My mind kept drifting back to that moment, the artist's touch, his gaze, the feeling of being truly seen. It was a sensation I hadn't realized I was craving. And it terrified me. I had spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect partner, trying to meet expectations, trying to be everything my husband needed. But in doing so, I had lost myself. I had neglected the parts of me that weren't just wife or mother, the parts of me that had desires and needs outside of those roles. And the artist had brought that part of me back to life, showing me that I was more than the sum of my duties. "You're quiet tonight," my husband said, glancing at me. He had noticed the shift, but he didn't know what to make of it. His voice held a hint of concern, but it was quickly masked by his usual optimism. "Is everything okay?" I looked at him, searching for something in his eyes, something that would tell me that he saw what was happening to us, that he recognized the quiet collapse of the life we had built. But there was nothing there. No recognition, no understanding. Just the same blind hope that everything would turn out fine if we just kept pushing forward. "I'm fine," I said, my voice betraying me. It was a lie, but it was the only one I could offer. He smiled, as if reassured by my words, and continued talking about the next steps in our plan. But I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was elsewhere, lost in the tension I could feel between us. I had been trying so hard to preserve this marriage, this life, but now I was beginning to question if it was worth saving. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I felt the familiar warmth of my husband beside me, but it wasn't the same. The intimacy we had once shared felt distant, almost foreign. I could feel him breathing softly next to me, but it didn't bring the comfort it used to. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, a longing for something I couldn't define. I turned over to face him, watching him sleep, his face soft in the glow of the moonlight. He looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm brewing inside me. And in that moment, I realized something. No matter how much I tried to bury it, no matter how much I tried to convince myself that everything would be fine, I was changing. And the change was happening whether I was ready for it or not. I thought about the artist again. I thought about the way he had looked at me, the way he had seen something in me that no one else had. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered what it would feel like to be truly seen, not just for my role in someone else's life, but for who I was, for what I wanted. The artist had given me that glimpse, that fleeting moment of self-recognition, and now I couldn't go back. The next day, I found myself standing in front of the mirror again. It wasn't just about the way I looked. It was about what I had become. I was no longer the woman I had been, no longer the wife who existed solely to meet the needs of others. And that scared me. But as I stood there, staring at my reflection, I realized that this fear, this uncertainty, was part of the process. Part of the journey I had to take if I was ever going to find out who I truly was. I wasn't sure where it would lead. I wasn't sure if it would lead me back to my husband or if it would take me somewhere else entirely. But I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep living a lie. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. The phone call from the artist still lingered in my mind. His words, his invitation to explore something deeper, were still fresh in my thoughts. And as much as I tried to deny it, I knew that I had already made my choice. I had already crossed a line. And now, there was no going back. I wasn't sure if my marriage could survive this, if I could survive it. But I knew that I had to follow this path, wherever it led. The crossroads were behind me now. The only thing left to do was keep moving forward. And so, I made the decision. I called the artist. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turbulence inside me. "I'm ready." I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of freedom. It was terrifying. But it was also the only way forward. And I wasn't afraid anymore. It was strange how quickly everything changed. A week ago, I had been so sure of the path I was walking. A week ago, I had been someone who was simply going through the motions of a marriage that no longer seemed to fit. But now, I was standing at the precipice of something I could not ignore. The phone call had been the catalyst, the moment I had been both dreading and secretly craving. I had told the artist I was ready, but now that the words had left my mouth, I found myself unsure of what to do next. My heart raced in my chest, a constant reminder that I was no longer the person I had once been. The life I had lived, the comfortable, predictable life, was slipping away, like sand through my fingers. I couldn't stop it. I had already crossed a line, and now I had to face the consequences of that decision. But what consequences awaited me? And how could I return to my husband, knowing that I had allowed myself to be seen by someone else in a way I had never allowed myself to be seen by him? The day after I called the artist, I found myself standing in the living room, my hand resting on the back of the sofa as I stared out the window. The city below looked so distant, so far removed from the turmoil I was feeling inside. My husband was in the other room, his presence a constant reminder of the life I had promised to preserve. But how could I preserve something that no longer felt real to me? I had spent so many years trying to maintain the illusion that everything was fine, that we were fine. But now, the cracks in that illusion were too big to ignore. My mind kept drifting back to the artist, the way he made me feel, the way he saw me. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about him. It was about me. It was about reclaiming something I had lost, the ability to feel truly alive, to feel truly seen. I couldn't talk to my husband about it. I knew that. He wouldn't understand. He wouldn't see it the way I saw it. His response would be the same as always, he would try to fix it, to smooth things over, to keep everything in place. But this time, there was no fixing it. There was no going back. I had already changed. Are you okay? My husband's voice interrupted my thoughts, and I turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, watching me with a concerned expression. His brow was furrowed, and there was a hint of something in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in a while. It was the same look he had given me when we first met, when everything was fresh and new. But now, it felt distant. It felt like we were strangers trying to bridge a gap we couldn't cross. I'm fine, I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Just thinking. He nodded, but I could see the hesitation in his gaze. He wasn't convinced. And neither was I. You've been distant lately, he said softly, stepping closer. I know things have been complicated, but I want you to know I'm here. We're in this together. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. His words were comforting, but they also felt like a trap. I didn't want to figure it out with him. I didn't want to keep pretending. But I didn't know how to tell him that without shattering everything. I know, I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. I just need some time. He didn't press further. Instead, he simply nodded and walked away, leaving me standing there with the weight of my own thoughts. The moment felt like a turning point, a final acknowledgement that things were no longer as they seemed. I had already made my choice. Now, I had to face it. Later that evening, I found myself back at the artist's studio. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. He was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out at the city skyline. When he heard me enter, he turned around, a smile crossing his face. You came, he said, his voice low and welcoming. It was the same calm tone he always used, but this time, there was something different in it. Something that made my pulse quicken. I'm glad. I nodded, my throat dry. I'm ready, I said, my voice barely audible. It wasn't a declaration. It was a surrender. A surrender to something I wasn't sure I fully understood. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he motioned for me to sit down. The studio felt more intimate tonight, the soft light from the lamps casting shadows on the walls. There was no canvas this time. No paints. Just the two of us, alone in the silence. I've been thinking about you, he said after a moment, his gaze intense. About what you need. What you want. I looked at him, unsure of how to respond. His words made me feel vulnerable, exposed in a way that I wasn't sure I was ready for. But at the same time, they felt like a release. They felt like permission to finally let go of everything that had been holding me back. I don't know what I need, I admitted, my voice trembling. I don't even know what I want anymore. He took a step closer, his presence filling the room. "That's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to know right away. I just want to be here, to help you figure it out." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to protect myself. I didn't feel the need to pretend. I could feel the tension between us, thick and palpable, but it didn't scare me anymore. It was a truth I hadn't allowed myself to face, the truth that I had been searching for something beyond the life I had built. And now, I was finally ready to see where it would lead. He didn't touch me, didn't move any closer. Instead, he simply stood there, waiting for me to make the next move. And in that moment, I realized that the next move wasn't about him. It was about me. It was about deciding who I wanted to be. It was about reclaiming my own desires, my own needs, and for the first time in years, not feeling guilty for doing so. "I need to figure out what I want," I said quietly, my eyes meeting his. "But I'm ready to start." And with that, everything shifted. The world outside the studio faded away, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt like I was finally on the right path. Not the path I had planned, not the one I had imagined, but a path that was mine. And that, in itself, was enough. I walked into the studio the next day with a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. It was strange, how everything felt different yet the same. The artist was there, as usual, preparing his space, setting up the canvas and brushes. There was no grand speech, no dramatic exchange. It was just him, doing what he did best. It was almost as if nothing had changed, but I knew that something inside me had shifted irrevocably. As I stood in the doorway, the familiar smell of paint and linseed oil filled my senses. The room felt more intimate this time, quieter, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I had made a decision, a choice that I knew I could never undo. The question, now, wasn't about what I had chosen but about what I was going to do with it. The artist didn't turn when I entered. He kept his back to me, busying himself with something on the counter. I took a few steps into the room, my heart beating faster with each one. I was here because I had crossed a line. A line that I wasn't sure I was ready to cross, but now that I had, I couldn't go back. He turned finally, and his gaze met mine. There was a calmness in his eyes, but underneath it, I could see the spark of something else, curiosity, maybe even anticipation. He had seen me change. I wasn't the same woman who had first walked into his studio, unsure and hesitant. I had allowed myself to be seen, truly seen, and now the consequences of that were beginning to unfold. "Come in," he said softly, gesturing toward the chair I had sat in before. His voice was warm, almost inviting, but there was something else there, something unspoken. A shared understanding of what was about to happen. I nodded and sat down, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't thinking about the art, not anymore. I was thinking about the choices I had made, the choices that had led me here. I had told my husband that everything was fine. That we were fine. But inside, I knew the truth. I wasn't fine. I hadn't been for a long time. And now, as I sat here in this studio with the artist, I knew I was about to confront that truth head-on. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "About everything." The artist paused, his eyes never leaving mine. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. He understood that I wasn't just talking about the painting, about the art. I was talking about something deeper, something more personal. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to," he said, his voice steady, calm. "But I'm here if you do." It was strange how comforting that was. The way he didn't pressure me, didn't push for answers. He simply allowed me the space to decide what I needed to say. And in that moment, I realized that this was what I had been looking for all along, the freedom to speak without fear of judgment, the freedom to simply exist without having to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. I've been living in a way that doesn't feel real, I confessed, my voice shaking slightly. For so long, I thought I could just keep going, that things would eventually get better. But now I realize that I've been pretending. Pretending that everything's fine when it's not. Pretending that I'm someone I'm not. The artist nodded, his expression unreadable. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, but I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of his understanding, and it gave me the courage to continue. I don't know who I am anymore, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I don't know what I want. I don't know what I need. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep lying to myself. There it was, out in the open. The truth that I had been running from for so long. I had been pretending for everyone, my husband, my family, even myself. I had played the part of the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect woman. But none of it had been real. And the more I tried to fit into that mold, the more I lost myself. I understand, the artist said quietly. He didn't need to say anything else. His words, simple as they were, carried an understanding that I didn't even know I was looking for. He wasn't trying to fix me. He wasn't trying to offer me solutions. He was simply there, allowing me to be. I sat there for a long time, the silence between us stretching out, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel the need to fill it with words. I didn't feel the pressure to explain myself, to justify my actions. I simply existed in that moment, and that was enough. When the silence finally broke, it wasn't with words, but with an invitation. The artist motioned to the canvas in the corner, where he had begun to paint a new piece. It wasn't the same as before, there were no bold strokes of color, no immediate sense of purpose. It was a slow, deliberate process, each line building upon the last, until something began to take shape. Something beautiful, something raw. Are you ready? He asked softly, his eyes meeting mine again. I nodded, a quiet affirmation of my own readiness. Not just to continue with the painting, but to continue with this journey. To face the parts of myself I had been avoiding. The parts that had been buried for so long. As I sat there, I realized that this was more than just about art. This was about rediscovering who I was, about finding the pieces of myself that I had forgotten. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But it was a journey I had to take. One step at a time. The artist began to paint again, his movements deliberate and fluid. And as I watched him, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know where this path would lead. But for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. The path toward finding myself. I wasn't sure what would happen when I went home. I wasn't sure what I would say to my husband. But I knew that I had to be honest with myself first. I had to stop pretending. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally ready to do that. It felt like the walls were closing in on me when I finally stepped through the front door of our home. I had spent the last few days in a strange, disorienting haze, vacillating between clarity and confusion. The artist had given me the space to find myself, to look inward, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though everything made sense. But now, as I entered the place I had called home for years, the weight of reality came crashing down on me. My husband was in the living room, sitting on the couch, his face buried in his phone. He didn't look up when I walked in, his focus entirely consumed by whatever he was reading. The air between us had thickened over the past few weeks. Every word felt too heavy, every touch too charged. There was an unspoken tension hanging in the space we once filled with comfort, but now, it was suffocating. I stood there for a moment, just watching him, wondering how I was supposed to bridge the gap between us. I had been living in two worlds, the one where I was still the wife, still the partner, and the one where I was becoming someone else entirely. The person who had met the artist, who had been seen in a way that made me feel alive. That woman was emerging, and I wasn't sure how she fit into the life I had built with my husband. He glanced up finally, his eyes meeting mine with a sense of familiarity. That same look of concern. I could tell he had been waiting for me to come back to him, to snap out of whatever had been weighing on me. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could. I wasn't sure I wanted to. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice soft, almost cautious, as if unsure of how to approach me. He seemed to know that something had changed, but he didn't understand what. I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. Instead, I stepped into the living room and sat down beside him. The space between us felt monumental, as though we were strangers living under the same roof, sharing the same life but no longer connecting. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for a response, but I didn't have one. Not yet. "I met with the artist again," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "He's been helping me to understand what's going on inside. What I really want." His face changed slightly at the mention of the artist's name. I could see a flicker of something, concern, maybe, or a tinge of jealousy, but it passed quickly. He didn't say anything, and I wasn't sure if he wanted me to continue or if he was too afraid of what I might say next. "I've been thinking about us," I continued, my eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet his gaze. "About everything." "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe fear, maybe doubt. He didn't look at me directly as he asked, but I could feel the weight of his words pressing against me, like a challenge. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know if I was sure. How could I be? Everything had changed so quickly, so unexpectedly. The woman I had been was slipping away, and the woman I was becoming felt like someone else entirely. But was that someone else better? Was that someone more authentic, more true to who I really was? "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know what's happening, but I can't keep pretending." The silence between us stretched for what felt like hours, the weight of my confession hanging in the air. I wanted to say more. I wanted to explain that this wasn't about the artist, about what he represented. It wasn't even about him, really. It was about me. About the parts of myself that had been buried for so long, the parts one had denied because I was afraid of what would happen if I let them come to the surface. "I think I've lost myself," I said quietly, my voice cracking. "And I don't know how to find my way back." His hand reached out, hesitantly, and for a moment, I thought he might pull me into his arms, might offer me comfort the way he always had. But he didn't. Instead, he simply rested his hand on my shoulder, his touch warm but distant. "I've been trying, you know," he said, his voice gentle. "I've been trying to give you everything you wanted. To make things work. But it feels like I've been losing you." I could feel his pain, his confusion. It was written all over his face, in the tightness of his jaw, the furrow of his brow. And I realized, in that moment, that he had been trying to keep us together, trying to hold on to something that had already slipped away. But he didn't understand. He couldn't understand what I was feeling, what I had discovered about myself. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "But I think we've both been pretending. For so long, we've been pretending that things are fine. That we're fine." He didn't respond right away. He simply sat there, his hand still on my shoulder, the weight of his presence filling the room. I could feel him processing my words, trying to make sense of them. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the distance between us. It was wide, and it was growing with every passing moment. I had already made my choice. I had already taken that step toward the unknown, and there was no going back. But what did that mean for us? What did it mean for our marriage? "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what you need anymore. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. I didn't know what I needed either. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in the shadows, pretending to be something I wasn't. I needed to be true to myself, even if it meant losing everything I had built with him. I need to find myself, I said softly, the words feeling like an apology, like a confession. I need to figure out who I am, apart from everything I've been. And I don't know if we can do that together anymore. The words hung in the air, suspended between us. There was no immediate response. No comfort. No reassurance. Just the weight of the truth settling in, settling between us. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. Not until I had made peace with this decision. I think we need some time, I said, my voice shaky but firm. Time apart. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply nodded, as if he had already known that this was coming. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was being honest with myself. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, and walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I turned back to look at him. His face was a mixture of confusion and sadness, but there was also a glimmer of understanding, as though he knew this was the only way forward. I'm sorry, I said again, my voice barely a whisper. And then I left, closing the door behind me, knowing that there was no turning back now. The days following my departure from the house were a blur of emotions. I had never imagined that walking away from everything would feel like this, like a suffocating silence pressing in from all sides. I didn't know where to go. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know what I was looking for anymore, but I knew one thing for certain, I needed space. Space to think, to breathe, to figure out who I was, apart from the roles I had been playing for so long. I rented a small apartment in the city, a quiet place on the third floor of an old building. It was nothing fancy, just a place to sleep, a place to be alone. I spent the first few days there in a haze, caught between relief and guilt. Relief because I finally had the freedom to be myself, to think for myself. Guilt because I had walked away from my husband, from the life we had built together. I didn't call him. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I had told him everything that had been on my mind the night I left, how I felt trapped, how I was no longer the woman I had been, how I had lost myself in a marriage that had slowly become a shadow of what it once was. But even as I spoke those words, I knew they weren't enough. They were only half-truths. The full truth was that I had already made up my mind. I had already chosen this path, and nothing was going to change that. But as the days passed, the silence between us began to gnaw at me. It wasn't just the absence of his voice, it was the absence of the life we had shared. I kept imagining what he must be feeling, what he must be thinking. Had he accepted it, or was he waiting for me to come back? I wondered if he was angry with me, if he felt betrayed. I didn't know if he understood why I had to leave. But I couldn't go back. Not yet. Not until I had figured out what I was supposed to do next. One evening, as I sat on the couch in my new apartment, the phone rang. It was him. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the screen. My finger hovered over the green button, and for a moment, I thought about not answering. But then I realized that I couldn't keep running. I couldn't hide from this anymore. So, I pressed the button and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice hoarse, like I hadn't used it in days. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't speak at first. I could feel his hesitation, his uncertainty, and for the first time, I realized that we were both in the same place, lost. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, almost tentative. "I don't know," I replied truthfully. I don't know what I'm doing. Another silence followed, but this time, it wasn't as heavy. It was just space. Space for both of us to breathe, to exist in this strange new reality. I've been thinking about what you said, he said, finally breaking the silence. I don't think I really understood what you needed. What you were going through. I thought this experiment, that it would fix things. But I was wrong. I closed my eyes, the words hitting me harder than I expected. I had known that he didn't fully understand, that he hadn't really seen the depth of what I was feeling, but hearing him admit it, hearing him acknowledge that he had been wrong, was something else entirely. I've been trying so hard to make things work, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. But maybe I've been trying to fix something that can't be fixed. Maybe I've been trying to hold on to something that isn't there anymore. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this conversation. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear his words, or to answer them. But I knew that it was necessary. It was necessary to confront this, to face the reality of what had happened between us. I'm sorry, I whispered, though the words felt inadequate. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to make you understand that I couldn't keep pretending. He was quiet for a long time, and I wondered if he was trying to process everything I had said. I didn't know what to say next. Part of me wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that everything would be okay, but I knew that would be a lie. I didn't know what the future held for us. I didn't know if there was a future for us. I don't want to lose you, he said finally, his voice low. But I can't keep holding on if it's only going to tear us apart. His words cut through me like a knife, but they also made something inside me shift. It wasn't about the marriage anymore. It wasn't about what we had built. It was about what we both needed, what we both deserved. I had spent so long living for someone else, trying to be who I thought I needed to be. But now, for the first time, I was beginning to see that it wasn't just about me. It was about him, too. It was about what we both needed to move forward, whether that meant together or apart. I don't want to lose you either, I said quietly. But I think we both need to figure out who we are without each other. I think we need to find ourselves first before we can even think about finding each other again. There was another long pause, and I could hear the soft rustle of his breathing, the sound of him trying to hold back his emotions. I could feel the weight of this moment, the heaviness of the decision we were both making. I understand, he said, his voice soft but firm. I don't like it, but I understand. The words hung in the air between us, the finality of them sinking in. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if there was a way forward for us, or if we would both walk away from this and never look back. But in that moment, I knew that the path I was on was mine to walk alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was what I needed. To be alone. To figure out who I was before I could ever truly share myself with someone else. I'll give you the space you need, he said quietly, his voice filled with resignation. But I won't stop caring about you. I hope you know that. I know, I whispered, feeling the weight of his words in my chest. I know. And then, there was nothing. No more words, no more excuses. Just the soft hum of the phone line, a distance between us that was impossible to ignore. I hung up the phone and sat there, the silence in my apartment louder than ever before. I wasn't sure if I had made the right decision, but I knew I had made a decision that I had to live with. I had stepped into the unknown, and now I had to see where it led. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. But that freedom was bittersweet. Because even though I had let go, even though I had taken a step towards something new, there was a part of me that would always carry the weight of what I had left behind. I didn't know where this journey would take me. But I was ready to find out. It's strange, the way life forces decisions upon you. How everything seems to build up to one pivotal moment, A moment where you have to choose whether to continue down the path you've been walking or take a sharp turn and head in a new direction. I had reached that point. And as I sat alone in my small apartment, staring out the window at the city below, I realized that everything had led me to this moment. The choices I had made, the actions I had taken, they had all brought me here. And now, I had to decide where to go from here. I had been away from my husband for almost 2 weeks now, and the silence between us had become a heavy weight, one I couldn't ignore. I had tried to fill the time with distractions, walking around the city, reading, even calling a few old friends. But none of it helped. The quiet in my apartment was suffocating, and no matter how hard I tried to push the thoughts away, they always found their way back to the surface. I thought about him constantly. My husband. The man I had been with for so many years. The man I had promised to love and cherish, for better or for worse. But in those quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I realized something that I had been avoiding for a long time. I had lost myself in our marriage. I had become so focused on being the perfect wife, on fulfilling his needs, that I had forgotten who I was. And now, I was paying the price for it. I remembered the conversation we had had when I left. The way he had tried so hard to convince me that everything would be fine, that we could fix this, that we could find our way back to each other. But I knew, deep down, that we couldn't. Because in order for things to work, I had to be true to myself first. And I couldn't do that living a life that wasn't mine. The artist had helped me see that. He had shown me that I was more than just a wife, more than just someone else's partner. I was a person, with my own desires, my own needs. I wasn't just a reflection of someone else's expectations. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a sense of who I was again. But that didn't make things any easier. In fact, it made them harder. Because now I had to face the consequences of my actions. I had to face the fact that I had hurt my husband, that I had walked away from everything we had built together. I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to that life, but I also wasn't sure if I could move forward without knowing what was waiting for me. I had to make a choice. A choice that would determine not only my future but also the future of my marriage. Could I go back to him? Could I rebuild what we had, knowing that I had changed, that I wasn't the same person I had been when we first got married? Or was it time to let go completely, to walk away from everything and find my own way? I sat in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. My mind kept drifting back to the artist, to the way he had made me feel, to the way he had helped me rediscover a part of myself that I had forgotten. But even as I thought about him, I knew that I couldn't make this decision based on him. I couldn't use him as a crutch, as a reason to justify leaving my husband. I had to make the choice for myself, and for the life I wanted to create. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. The streets were alive with movement, with people going about their day, living their lives. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could be part of that world again. I wasn't just a bystander, waiting for things to change. I could make the change. I could take control of my own life. The thought terrified me. It terrified me because it meant leaving behind the safety of what I had known, stepping into the unknown, where nothing was guaranteed. But it also excited me. Because for the first time in years, I felt free. Free to be myself. Free to choose my own path. I picked up my phone and dialed my husband's number. The call rang for what seemed like an eternity, each ring making my heart beat faster. But finally, he picked up. Hello? His voice was hesitant, unsure, and I could hear the tension in his words. Hi, I said softly, my voice shaky. It's me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could feel his uncertainty, his hesitation. I could almost see him, sitting in the same place I had left him, wondering what was coming next. I've been thinking, I began, my voice quiet but firm. I've been thinking about everything. About us. And I've realized that I need to be honest with you. With myself. He didn't say anything, but I could feel him listening, waiting for me to continue. I don't know where we go from here, I said, the words feeling like a weight lifted from my shoulders. I don't know if we can fix things, if we can go back to what we had. But I know that I need to find out who I am first. I can't be the person you need me to be if I'm not true to myself. I paused, taking a deep breath. I think we need some time. Time apart. Time for both of us to figure out what we want. I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but I know I can't keep living in this limbo. And I don't think you can either. There was a long silence, and I held my breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he spoke. I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I understand. I don't know what to do with all of this. I don't know either, I replied softly. But I think it's time we figure it out separately. I'm sorry. I understand, he said again, and I could hear the pain in his voice. But there was something else there too, something that sounded like acceptance. We said goodbye, and I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. The choice had been made. It wasn't easy. It wasn't simple. But it was mine. I didn't know what the future held, and I didn't know where this path would lead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. It was a path of self-discovery, of freedom, of embracing who I was, not who I was supposed to be. And as I stood there, looking out the window at the city below, I knew that I was ready to face whatever came next. Because I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was finally ready to live.